Delighted to welcome Jace Bell back to the show today to talk about dead letter queues in Kafka. Do you need them? How should you use them? What are kind of the parameters around using them in Kafka? We cover this. Jace is a guy who knows. He sees Kafka running in production all the time because that's his job. Streaming audio is brought to you by Confluent Developer. That's developer.confluent.io. Confluent Developer's website that has, in my opinion, everything you need to get started learning Kafka and Confluent and everything in the related ecosystem. We've got great courses there to get you started. This podcast, you can get a list of episodes about this podcast. There's a library of streaming design patterns, all kinds of great things there. So check it out, developer.confluent.io. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Streaming Audio. I am your host, Tim Berglund, and I am joined again by returning guest, Jace Bell. He of the famous conceptual Twitter series, Morning, Yes, I Have Tea, and senior DevOps engineer at Digitalis. Jace, welcome.
Thank you. That's an intro. I mean, in all fairness, you don't have to use Jason and Jace. You can just pick one of the two.
Yeah, no, I like it. The middle one's in quotes. Jason, Jace.
Jace. Right,
Oh,
okay.
you can't see the quotes. I didn't want to do your finger quotes.
So you know, if I walk down the street, people are going to go, "Hi, Jace."
Exactly. So for anybody who's watching on the YouTube version, seeing me do the air quotes, it's just it's a bad look. So
is it?
I just
bad look?
I mean, it's a bad look. You know.
Oh,
yeah, I don't.
Right.
I don't.
Oh, L-O-O-K, not L-U-C-K.
L-O-O-K. Yes. I don't know what the other one means.
Right. Okay.
That might be a British English thing.
I'm glad we've covered that now.
Yeah. No, it's important.
It is.
We're going to cover other things, and if you a few links in the show notes. We'll certainly link to. I'd like to link to several morning. Yes, I have tea tweets. I think people need to get a sense of the grammar of the series. And
it's not. Look, there's not much to it. In all fairness,
I think it's a deeper well than you think. But
I'm starting to think that myself because some people have actually said, "We now go to bed when you have tea."
Right. I go to bed a little early. I'm usually asleep before you have tea, but I look in the morning, and most mornings I catch it.
Interestingly, someone mentioned that it was the most regular thing as part of the pandemic was knowing that. It was really weird when someone put it that way. It's like we had that to hang on to. Like,
yes.
Really?
Yes.
So that was quite nice.
And you can't underestimate those things. We're recording this late July 2021. People are talking about the Delta variant, but life is becoming sort of post-pandemic, we think.
I still got to get out of the car.
Okay. But little consistencies like that. I have a younger brother who's a letter carrier, and especially early on in the pandemic, just the mail is still happening. You got to hang on to these little things.
Yeah.
Little
absolutely.
Parts of life that just don't seem to go away, and sometimes they're a comfort, sometimes they're not. Like, say, segue approaching dead letter queues.
That was pretty good.
That was good. That was a good segue. I felt it was so good I had to just hang a lantern on it. You know,
it was.
It
was seamless. I'll give you that, Tim.
All right. A month or so ago, we had a conversation on Twitter. We'll link to that conversation. I'm not sure that it was really all that deep, but you were talking about. We had a brief conversation about dead letter queues, and to be honest, I don't even remember what we were saying about them. I just remember that was the topic, and I'm like, you need to be here. You need to come back on the podcast. Your hope that the triumph of hope over experience for you as a returning guest, and we need to talk about this. So
I mean, who wasn't free today? Just tell me.
Right, fair enough. Fair enough. I guess we were both free today, weren't we?
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. Yeah, okay, let's go with that. Yeah, it was I can't even remember the tweet thread now. I do know where it originated from, and it came from my friend Bruce Sterling, who is the CEO of Mastodon C. I used to work for Mastodon C a long time ago. And Bruce is a dear friend, and he's a great data nerd, and he taught me Clojure programming, among a few other people, which is now sort of my main language of choice. Not within Digitalis, because I do DevOps, so I'm not really doing much programming. But when I do any programming, it's in Clojure. So yeah, and I can't even remember now how that conversation came about.
Well, I just looked up the tweet. Let me refresh
Oh,
your
right.
memory.
Okay.
You posted a picture that says that was a what my people would call a trash can, and it said "event litter bin."
Yes, that
And
was
you said
it. Yeah.
Kafka dead letter queues, also known as. And then someone else said, "Why does Kafka need a dead letter queue? It is a tape, not a queue. I'd say log, not a queue. It's like reading a CSV. I would not say that, but." And Jay said, "Do you want a proper reason?" You said, "Happy to present a lecture in your town soon." And I said, "It's on. Get on my podcast." So,
Yeah. So I actually visited Bruce very briefly a couple of months ago when I was driving across the Scotland. So yeah, I did see him, but we didn't talk about that. We just hung, hung out together, which was really nice. Not
exactly.
seen him in a while.
Wonderful.
Anyway, yeah, dead letter queues. Where should we start with this one?
Yeah. Is it okay to call them queues, or can I call them dead letter
Now,
topics?
yeah, and this is so I'm trying to get my brain to say dead letter topics,
Uh-huh.
but the thing is that gives me the abbreviation of DLT, which
Okay.
is basically the abbreviation of a DJ in the UK in the 1970s.
Okay.
So it's in my head where I just go DLQ. It's still dead letter Q to me.
Yeah.
It's just language.
It is, and
But yes, it is a
Kafka topics
topic.
aren't queues, but it's this
Yeah.
standard term.
So, in fact, what does Mr. Moffat call them? Well, actually, yeah, even in the Connect, in the Confluent Cloud
Right.
documentation, it says dead letter Q.
Yes, sir, it does.
So
And
let's
that's
call them that.
yeah. Okay. Dead letter Q.
So I've got a big monitor.
For those not on the YouTube feed, Jace is looking at a big monitor. I'm occasionally looking at mine. He's looking around what is apparently a wall screen in front of him.
No, it's not that big, but it's there.
It's there.
My show notes are here, my monitor's there, and you're here.
Excellent.
So
It all falls into place.
feels like I'm waffling a bit. I'm sorry.
That's
It's
okay.
hot.
So, I mean, in
Really
case
hot.
there's anybody, maybe back us up a step. What if there's somebody new and who hasn't done a lot of work in messaging and isn't even familiar with the original concept? What is the
Okay.
original concept?
So, in an ideal world, especially in Kafka, we produce a message and then we consume a message. That's all fine. So it goes from here to here and everyone's happy. Occasionally, due to some reason or another, that is going to fail. And the message gets so far and we go, no, not going to deal with that.
Right.
And it goes and gets redirected to a dead letter queue topic. And then we deal with it later, or not, as the case may be, which we'll end up talking about as time goes on. So it's essentially another topic where we store messages that have caused errors. Caused by what? We'll get to discuss.
Right.
But that's the basic premise. And then we
Something
deal
about
with it.
the computational process we were using for doing work on messages failed. The program doesn't know what to do.
Yeah. So a good example point, deserialization is a big thing. So if I was deserializing an Avro message and someone by accident, and it does happen, passed in either a null value or a JSON message, the deserialization would fail and we would throw it into the dead letter queue. That's basically it. Within the Kafka realm, we have certain considerations to take, whether it is just a normal producer, whether it's a streaming API job, whether it's Kafka Connect, or whether it's KSQL.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Tim?
It does. Backing up farther, though, in the pre-Kafka world,
the pre-Kafka world, yeah.
What in because this comes, we say queue because this comes from messaging systems.
Yes.
What were dead letter? I mean, I think basically the same thing, but what were they there, and why? If I lived in the messaging world, why would they have a place of prominence in my mind?
You know what? That's a really good question and one I can't answer.
All right, there you go.
You got
So
me.
yeah,
Um,
the same basic
yeah.
idea though is you've got messages going into queues, and inside the messaging system, some sort of logic about where they ought to go next, and say routing or something like that, and that fails, and so anytime the computational process for figuring out what to do with a message next isn't successful, then you've got this place to put it, which is the dead letter queue,
Mm.
where messages go to die. And this was
Yes.
this was kind of an expected thing in your old school enterprise messaging system. It was a feature of the
Yeah.
system,
Which does really bring up the, you use a dead letter queue obviously to take those messages out because
right?
they're going to cause you problems downstream. But at the same time, are you ever going to use them? I mean, that's one of those debates, and it really depends on the type of data it is.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, when I talk about this with teams and advising people and all the rest of it, it's like, would you miss the message if it failed? Would you miss it? And if they go, oh no, it's no big deal to us, then fine, you don't need a deal queue, just get rid of it, just
Yep.
handle the exception and move on.
Yep. Log the
Um,
exception. Send the exception
yeah,
to the browser window like a good programmer, and
send it to Elasticsearch, please.
there you go. Yeah. Put it somewhere where it can be found, and drop the message. So in the spirit of not burying the lead, I think that's kind of at least in my opinion, I think you just expressed the rule. Are you going to do anything with it? Do you
Yeah,
have a
exactly.
process? Uh,
And what is surprising, and what I found out over the last few years, is people will say, "Oh yeah, we'll just put this message in the dead letter queue," and it's like, "Well, what are you going to do with it?" Um, uh, don't know.
right.
It's like so you just got all these messages building up. Well, are you going to look at them? Because you need to write something to consume the DLQ as well.
Uh-huh.
And this seems to escape some people.
The serialization thing, that's a really clean example. Can you
It is.
walk us through, because you actually have an opportunity to take a second pass computationally at the messages in the dead letter queue. Can you walk us through that use
What you
case?
literally want to walk? I mean, I sat down right now. You literally want me to walk it?
No, I want you to
Okay.
sit and drink tea.
Okay, I'll sit and drink tea.
And I mean, I
See,
pace when I talk sometimes. It's a lot of work for me to sit down for this
I
podcast.
would do normally, but I'm wired to
Yeah,
this
right. Me
thing. So
too.
the
Me too.
laptop's going to go
So
everywhere. It's going to make a mess. That's why I
we don't
thought I'd
want
ask
that.
in
So
advance. Um,
metaphorically,
Metaphorically. So yeah, the deserialization is actually a really interesting one. So because as we know, we should all be doing things in Avro or Protobuf or Parquet or
mhm.
yeah, to make sure that our messages are formally accepted and work on both ends, from producing to consuming. So we serialize at the producer side and we deserialize at the consumer side. That's fine. Whether that's streaming, Kafka Connect,
Mhm.
doesn't matter.
And there's only one producer, and it's always serializing the same way, perfectly
Yes,
all the time, and everything is fine.
in an ideal world.
That's a world that is like a Star Trek episode. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Big data jokes parked. Um, the number of people that send me that GIF. Thank you. Um,
Yes.
I love you all dearly, but please don't send me that GIF again. Um, yeah, so I'm going to get onto the sort of guts of Kafka Connect later, but a lot of
Okay.
my
Okay.
work is around Kafka Connect. So the deserialization at that point, um, Kafka Connect would batch 500 messages by default from the topic. It would deserialize them and then do the processing. If there's any transformation steps in there, it'll do that too. But
Yeah.
what I'm talking about here is just the sync of consuming the messages, deserialization, and then forwarding on to whatever that process is, whether it's writing to a file or a HTTP endpoint or a database or what have you. We
Right.
have to deserialize from that Avro message, as an example. So if that Avro message during deserialization fails, for whatever reason, it could be incorrect schema. against schema registry. It's not working. Schema registry could be down, but obviously you should have two of those load balanced. I'm full of good information now. Yeah. So your deserialization would happen if a message fails. That message would get routed to the dead letter queue, assuming you have the settings set in your Kafka Connect sync configuration.
Right, which is an actual. It's a feature of Connect.
Yes.
If something fails, put it in this other topic.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's called dead letter queue in the documentation.
It is. It is. That's why I call it dead letter queue, not dead letter topic. It's in my head. It's just ingrained in me.
And I realize I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves with the Connect.
But no, it's actually a good place to start in that explanation. It's actually the perfect use case of knowing when that DLQ is going to be used.
Right.
Because officially we don't have DLQs in the streaming API.
Right.
You are either you're either handling a deserialization exception or a producer exception, which are configurable. It's either continue or fail at that point in the streaming API. Yeah.
Right.
But you ain't stopping unless you're failing and then you do stop. Fine, fair enough. But it's up to you to handle that message within the streaming API, whether you forward it to another topic to say that that's failed or you just ignore it. That goes back to my original argument of, do you need it? You know?
Right.
So anyway, we're kind of tangenting off here, and I'm trying to bring it back. That's not your fault. That's my fault entirely.
But the planning question, beginning with the planning question on dead letter queues, the question is really, do you need it? Or to make that a little sharper, is there going to be a consumer? Is this just a waste bin? Or is there at least a plan for something to read these messages?
Well, let's take it back a step further. What's the nature of the message? If it's a payment message, if it's a payment command, you don't want to be losing that.
No, you don't.
Okay? You don't want to be losing money.
No.
I don't want to be losing money.
No.
Yeah. I'm English. I'm Yorkshire. I definitely don't want to be losing money. So, yeah, it all depends on the nature of the topic. It depends on the nature of the message that you're processing. If it's a payment thing, then you definitely need it in a DLQ to handle it later.
Yeah. And that might even be some sort of human-in-the-loop process for that, right? If the computational process fails, somebody might need to look at what's wrong with the message, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a DLQ. It's actually quite an interesting design pattern, and it's one that I've seen. Uber did a post on this a long while ago, where it wasn't so much a DLQ. The DLQ actually came at the end, but what they said is you produce a message, the consumer takes it, tries against the service. If the service fails, what do you do with it? Let's write it to a retry topic first. Mm-hmm. And then you have a consumer on the retry topic, tries that same service again. If it fails, it goes to a second retry topic, and it goes down this little chain. Obviously, you have a timeout of stopping for a period of time.
Sure.
In case anything's happened along the service. It might need restarting. There might be an issue with it. And you go through that by n number of steps. And for each retry topic that you have a specific consumer trying against that topic. If it fails, you forward it on to the next retry topic. If by the last retry topic it's failed, then it goes to a DLQ and it gets handled to a manual process, which is actually probably the perfect case for that. Microservices fail, they get restarted again. If you've got pods on Kubernetes and they fail, they just come back up again.
Right.
So if your payment service on Kubernetes, for example, it dies, it restarts, it joins back into the cluster as available, and you can then start picking up where you left off. That timeout may only be 20, 30 seconds, and you don't want something like that going to a dead letter queue because you still have a potential. If it's a website, you've still got user waiting, potentially, in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Please wait. You can have a spinner going on.
Yeah.
You know? So I see things from customer perspective, so I'm sort of end to end.
Yes.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with narrow focus as well. I'm not wearing my T-shirt. I'm sorry. I'm not wearing my rabid Kafka dog T-shirt.
I'm also not on brand today. This is my Star Wars Magritte remix.
I won That's excellent. I wore that T-shirt at Kafka Summit Europe, though. So
Yeah, yeah,
there you go.
very good, very good.
Anyway, so yeah, depending on what the customer focus is, 30 seconds of waiting for payment, a retry is actually the best thing. You don't want it in a dead letter queue because it just says, "Oh, there's a problem with your
Right,
payment. Please try
right,
later."
right.
So from the customer experience, is that good or bad? And it was actually a really interesting post from me, but not necessarily about the customer side, but just say retry. There's a timeout. Retry again. There's a timeout. Retry again. It's failed. DLQ. Then we manually handle it, or we have a process to then handle it manually.
Right.
It's not something I've tried myself, but I've been looking into it a lot and thinking, actually, that's a really good pattern. I like that because I don't want, and it's like that railroad track thing, isn't it? It's just like there's a siding there and it's a dead end, there's a buffer at the end, and that's it. And that's the dead letter queue as far as I'm concerned. It's like, off we go, and it stops.
And you need to think of it as like operationally expensive to end up there because
Yes,
somebody
it
has to
is.
go look at it.
Yeah.
People, the way the fundamental distinction I make here. So the Kafka Connect thing, like if you have a topic with mixed serialization, there's JSON and Avro in there, and you're expecting it to be Avro on the sync connector. No, well, I mean, imagine it's happened, right?
Mixed
And
serialization. I know it can happen.
yeah, but if this is kind of the canonical connect dead letter queue story,
Yeah.
because you have a messy topic just because of life vagaries of life, um, and Avro serialization fails. Okay, kick it to the dead letter queue, and now you've got a consumer on that will reserialize into Avro, and then you can. Right? I mean, that's a nice computational. I know it's horrible to contemplate this, but the whole
That's all.
story,
It's just going around in my head.
right?
Like,
But the
why
whole
is he doing
story
that?
is computational. Okay, there's a program that knows what to do at every point.
Yes.
The real and that is using the connect feature called dead letter queue, and that's responsible and fine. And if
Mm-hmm.
this is your life, this is how you deal with it, and we're here for you. Um, the real distinction, the fundamental distinction I make here is when computational plans have failed, like the programs that you have written can't even. Then it goes to a dead letter queue, and probably there's going to be, as I put it, a mental process and not a computational one that
Mm-hmm.
that takes over. I mean, is that too simple?
No, but you got me thinking about something. It's not too simple. It's a case that, from what you just explained to me, my brain's going, no, that's just wrong. You know, you send it to a dead letter queue because it deserializes incorrectly, even though you've got mixed deserialization going on. No, that actually sounds like a kludge at that point and not actually a thought out process.
Okay.
And there's actually something that I go on about, not just in Kafka, I mean, generally, is when thinking about data products, and let's be honest, we're all in data products, so it's thinking about end to end. What does that data look like at the start? What do you want to look at? Where's it going, and how is you expecting it to look at the end? And at that point, if we bring Kafka into that equation, Kafka might just be the middle bit,
right?
Connect, sync, database, website, all of that, all bringing all these services in. But I'm just thinking, is there a kit that you could do now in Kafka Connect to have comma-separated deserializations?
Huh?
There you go.
Okay.
I don't know, just coming to the top of my head.
Yeah.
Because if you are saying, right, I'm going to send this JSON serialized downstream, and then next there's an Avro, because the producer can come from two different places. What if one department's serializing in Avro and another department is serializing in JSON?
My point.
Yeah, into the same topic.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and
that's really interesting.
That's in. I think that's in our Kafka Connect course. Maybe it's in our data pipelines course. It'd have to be Kafka Connect. So that'll be on Confluent Developer by the time this episode airs. And that's a pattern that we explain for like a completely computational use of a dead letter queue where you're doing it, but now you have this other program that knows what to do. And I think of the end of the line of the DLQ being where It's like panicking, like in a kernel.
But that actually, the panic there, what do we do at that point? Do we halt and catch fire?
Right.
Do we stop? Error
Yeah.
tolerance equals none is my
Right.
favorite thing in Kafka Connect syncs.
Okay.
And I've had this with. So this is an interesting one. We've kind of gone to the end first, and
Yes.
anyway, we'll cover these.
And here we are at time. So
Yeah. Nice talking to you. See you later.
my guest today has been.
Hiya. Bye. So the error tolerance. There are two error tolerances: all and none. For those who may not know.
Yes.
So in Kafka Connect, in syncs especially, it's quite important. You need to make a decision, and this is back down to discussing things again on a design level of what the expectation is. And it's something I go on about quite a lot in my Kafka capacity planning talk,
Yes.
which was actually the one that I did for the summit in Europe.
Making a note.
Yeah, and we know that a Kafka Connect sync is going to go to an external service. It's going to write to a file, could go to Elasticsearch, could go to... Now, I would say the majority of cases and the most popular use case is by using the JDBC plugin to write to a database table. Yeah? So, my question is, not everyone in the world has sharded, replicated database clusters going on. I would probably if there's one instance of MySQL, I like MySQL. I have no problems with it. In the same way, I have no problems with Postgres or SQLite. I really don't mind. But the question remains is, if there is a network failure between Kafka Connect sync and the database, you get an exception back. If you have error tolerance equals all, it will continue to process, but you will lose messages because they don't go to the dead letter queue. Remember that dead letter queues only handle deserialization and transformations.
Okay.
Now, there was a KIP a while ago. What was it? It's in my notes. I actually wrote things down today. So the put, we have a convert method, which deserializes the message. We have a transform method, which transforms any data that you have within configuration. Okay, and then the put method is the actual sync sending data out, and it'll send the collection of records and put. If anything happens in that put on that batch and it fails, like you get an SQL exception and error tolerance is all, it just spirals out of control. It will just carry on running, but records will never get written.
Okay.
They don't go to a dead letter queue because they can't. There's nowhere for them to go.
Okay.
Now, if you're just doing that in the general JDBC plugin, there are a number of retries, yes. But I don't know what the real truth... I haven't looked at the code now for the JDBC connector for a while. So the retry policies were in there to say, okay, it failed, I'll try again. It failed, I'll try again. N number of times. And then failed. But if error tolerance is all, it's still going to carry on. It's just going to try again. If error tolerance is none, then obviously the connector will stop. It failed. Hit your failed state, and obviously you are monitoring your Kafka Connect workers. So therefore, you will get an alert and paged, and you'll have to wake up and go and fix it and see what's going on.
Fix the network connectivity problem with the database. Yeah.
Now, some databases like Oracle, for example, you might get IP switching over the network, reconnects, those kinds of things. Sometimes it drops, sometimes it doesn't. It's quite seamless. I've come across that before. Those are sleepless nights. And the only thing you can do is just go in and reboot Kafka Connect and start it again, So, but those messages at that point where messages are put from the connector to the destination, if there's a failure at that point, it's too late. Everything to do with the DLQ is done and dusted.
Got it. Then, because you don't have error tolerance equals none.
Yeah, exactly. I like error tolerance equals none, so I can go and investigate, go and check the logs and see what's going on.
Right.
That's the kind of guy I am. And I will use tail.
I know you're not afraid to. Uh, you
I
know,
still do everything by a CLI.
I mostly do too. Maybe that's a
It's an
when you
age
came
thing.
of age thing. Yeah,
It's an
yeah.
age thing, Tim. It's an age thing. Here we
Sort of
are.
just where I feel comfortable. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Just give me a terminal window and I'm happy. Um, I must apologise to Robin, by the way. The Kafka cat thing was just like, I can't use that actually in some
Ah,
organisations.
yes.
I'm not allowed to.
Yes, Jace is referring to a Twitter conversation of a few days ago where I tweeted, and I'll try to link from this if I can find the tweet. But I tweeted some cool stuff Robin Moffat had posted about Kafka Cat.
And it is really cool.
It
Don't get
is
me
a
wrong, it's
great
fantastic.
command line utility, and Jace jumped in. He said, "Yeah, some places you're not allowed to use that." I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Um,
And I mean, just digressing from DLQs for a second, it does highlight an interesting thing that when we document these things and educate these things, it's not always available to everybody. I mean, I have to use the CLI and Kafka console consumer and grep things out the hard way.
uh-huh.
I'm not saying feel sorry for me. It's just that's what we have to do. There's no way around it.
And well, I mean, this is one of the roles you play in my life. Sometimes I'll tweet something about some kind of starry-eyed, oh yeah, the cloud is perfect, and everybody obviously use the
Right,
cloud,
the cloud is not perfect because your
right?
error tolerance is all.
Right. And Jason, and you'll just say, hey, there are people who run on-prem on account of they have to. And
Yes, yes.
yes, you are right. So this is a good corrective to the shiny and the cool.
And
The
this is
majority
it.
of
I
the
mean,
world is not there.
when people ask me how to get into Kafka and they go, "Oh, we're using Kafka Cat and all that kind of thing," that's great, but learn how to use the CLI
Mhm.
definitely first before you start diving into Kafka Cat. That's my thought anyway.
Now, we
Yeah.
are, my friend, at time. So closing thoughts on DLQs. What's a takeaway if you could distill your thoughts on the topic to
Okay.
one thing for people to remember? What would that be?
Okay. Here's my checklist 1 to N because I don't know where this is going to end yet.
Bring it.
First of all, do you actually need to deal with the message if it goes into the DLQ? If it's important to you, then obviously yes, you do. Secondly, if you are not using any form of serialization, deserialization, why not? It's available. It's there to you, and to minimize things going into a DLQ, that's where you start. It starts at source. It starts with the producer. Um, don't forget that if you are implementing a DLQ, you need something to consume those messages. You need to investigate what went wrong. Was it an application thing? Was it a Kafka thing? Kafka failures do happen, and you have to handle them. So when you're using your DLQ, are you going to take in just the message, or are you going to take the message and the exception, the message and the metadata? There's various controls you have, especially in Kafka Connect, about what information you can put into that DLQ. Okay. Um, if it's important stuff like payments and things that involve customers, yeah, you need a DLQ. Okay. Um, bearing in mind things like the streaming API and KSQL will continue to stream on failure by default. So if you do come across messages within those components that need handling, it's up to you to handle them into some form of topic of your choosing. But the same rule applies. If you're routing things to an exception topic, for example, you still need to read from it and you need to know what's going on. Plus, my final point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think it's 5.
Mhm.
I think, I'm not really taking account. And now I completely lost my train of thought. The, the, the DLQ itself, when you're consuming, if ordering is important to you, how do you then get those messages back into order? So if it's a social network, I make a post, post gets published, person replies to post, I delete post, but the delete never goes and goes to a DLQ for some reason. How do I handle that? Or account creation goes to a DLQ, but then someone updates the account. What happens? You have to think about the end to end. of every message that you're dealing with in those kinds of systems. There are tons of permutations where things can trip you up and catch you out. So by rule, I would prefer to try and handle things the best I can within application and not necessarily route to a DLQ. A DLQ is fine, but what I've noticed is people just go, "Oh, it goes to a DLQ, we'll deal with it whenever," when actually it needs to be dealt with in parallel to what's being processed at the same time. But most people, I say most people, the temptation, I say the temptation, that's far better. I'm not casting out to other people. That's not true. What I'm saying is we shouldn't be leaving consuming DLQ messages as a second afterthought. It's actually really important that we still deal with that message as quick as possible.
My guest today has been Jace Bell. Jace, thanks for being a part of Streaming Audio.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
And there you have it. Thanks for listening to this episode. Now, some important details before you go. Streaming Audio is brought to you by Confluent Developer. That's developer.confluent.io, a website dedicated to helping you learn Kafka, Confluent, and everything in the broader event streaming ecosystem. We've got free video courses, a library of event-driven architecture design patterns, executable tutorials covering KSQLDB, Kafka streams, and core Kafka APIs. There's even an index of episodes of this podcast. So if you take a course on Confluent Developer, you'll have the chance to use Confluent Cloud. When you sign up, use the code PODCAST100 to get an extra $100 of free Confluent Cloud usage. Anyway, as always, I hope this podcast was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, you can always reach out to me at tlberglund on Twitter. That's TLBERGLUND. Or you can leave a comment on the YouTube video if you're watching and not just listening, or reach out in our community Slack or forum. Both are linked in the show notes. And while you're at it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and to this podcast wherever fine podcasts are sold. And if you subscribe through Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover us, which we think is a good thing. So, thanks for your support, and we'll see you next time.